I have Dr. Chris Bai in the studio, or my friend Chris visiting me again. So this is the second time this year. Hopefully next year, maybe we'll get him 3 times. We'll see. But a few of the conversations we're going to have in this video, one of them would be delta E. For instance, many of you are wondering if you have 2 different displays, different brand, different models, whatever that may be, or even just one from the same brand. The delta E's are coming out below 2, for instance, and you would expect that everything will look the same to you, but yet it's not really quite the same. So we're going to have some discussion about that. We're also going to talk about this concept in display calibration. It's like EDR, it's really nerdy, geeky things, but what we're going to do is we're going to simplify it down for you. And we're going to talk about like why sometimes getting a hardware calibrated display is definitely a better option, especially if you want super good accurate colors because of many of the inherent features in hardware calibrated display. And lastly, if we have time, we're going to talk about Metamerism, and that's a lot about like how we perceive colors differently, how each one of us perceive differently, and how the lighting source can also change the way how we perceive color. So let's get started. This is ArtIsRight. Before we start, subscribe if you're new and hit on the bell icon so you'll be notified every time I upload cool new videos like this. So Chris, thank you so much for joining me in the studio again. This is the second time this year. Like I said, next year, hopefully that will be 3 times.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
There we go. So Chris, if you don't know, or Dr. Chris Bai, I just know him with Chris. We've known each other like over 10 years now. Yeah. So he is the senior color expert at BenQ. He is behind the colors behind these SW display, for example, like the one behind me, the PD line, and all the other projectors of BenQ. So anything that involves display, projection, color, this is the man. Chris, tell us a little bit more about yourself for my audience that haven't been following the channel or know about you.
Right. I'm also involved lots of international standards. For example, I'm the vice chair of ICC. It stands for International Color Consortium. I'm also the chair of the display working group. So basically, we make the international standards towards like international standard level. So basically, every challenges that come with the audience, like the users, we take into that discussion with lots of different vendors, and we make that a solution to it.
So essentially, he defines not only the standard of BenQ, but he also sits on the board that defines the standard internationally.
Yes.
And that's awesome because he gets a lot of say in these displays, which is great. Anything else you'd like to share with us about yourself? I know, like, let me give us some anecdote. I love coffee and sushi. Chris also happens to love the same thing, coffee and sushi as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And the other thing that I just found out after knowing Chris for 10 years, we never talk about this. I love whiskey and Chris also loves whiskey, but that's a side anecdotal story. Let's jump into our first discussion, which is something that I have been wanting to talk about for a very long time. And it's a concept that I think people really take this and sometimes they misunderstand it. For instance, one of the key things that we have are the concept of delta E, right? Exactly. So we run a display calibration, we validate it, we get a delta E value. And delta E is like this complex formula that's, calculated per each different color, and it gets averaged out. Now the thing is that sometimes what happens, we'll have display from the same brand, for example, same series, like SW or PD, whatever that may be. It's giving out delta E below 2, which is considered to be good, right, for a professional color accurate display.
Yes.
Yet colors are off from each other. We're not seeing the same colors on the panel. You're the right person to have this discussion with, so let's jump into it.
Okay, for example, delta E, that means is the difference between the measure color and the reference color. By reference color, that means each color there is a defined values, for example, the XYZ values for that defined color, for example, red, green, and blue, or white. So we compare the measure value from the display when we actually calibrate it to that reference value. So that reference value stays the same all the time, and that's the target we're hoping to achieve for. So the report you're looking at after we calibrate the monitor, that's the value that we compare to that target. Okay, but when you compare 2 different monitors against to each other, the target you're comparing to is the monitors to each other, not against the target we're comparing on the report, right? So that means the delta E could be think of it this way, right? One monitor could be like on the left side of that target. One monitor could be on the right side of the target, right? So in this case, this could be like delta E of 4 in this case. So that could be a huge difference between the two monitors. So that's why you see a large difference between these two monitors. So that's why it doesn't look the same.
Gotcha.
So one way to solve this is that we introduce this function in our PMU software. It's called monitor cloning.
Yeah.
So we can use a target of the second monitor that you want, or the first monitor you want to copy to. Okay. So you can actually measure the values from that monitor and then use that as a target, and then you calibrate to that monitor, not to the predefined
Reference
standard.
Yeah.
Yes, and you can compare to that. So in that case, you can have a better consistent color within the monitors. So you can achieve consistent colors across the monitors.
And that's another subtlety that when I do the monitor cloning video, I did not realize until I have a conversation with Chris a little bit further, is that what he just said was just absolutely right, but it's mind-boggling. We don't think about this. So when we normally do display calibration, we reference the target and everything is to that target. Now, the thing is that the value we see in the end are also the average from all those values. So the red, the green could be off slightly different.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. One of the monitor could have, a green with a delta E of 3, but all the other ones are below 1 or 2. Yeah. And that's why the average is still below 2. It's still considered good, but that one color may be off.
Yes.
But the other one, the red, may be off. And that's the reason why delta E is a good, I would say, overall metrics to look at the display, but not necessarily one to just pinpoint down exactly until you get into the nitty-gritty of just reviewing each individual color in grayscale.
Exactly,
right?
Yes.
And to add on to that concept, the reason why Palette Master Ultimate display clone, it's really awesome, is because when you clone the setting, for example, from another SW, and that's what always BenQ recommends anyway to get the best color possible, is that you're no longer calculating the delta E from that reference target, whatever that may be, Adobe RGB, DCI P3, Display P3, sRGB. You're actually using the first display that you're cloning from as the reference target. So the delta E you're getting, as long as you're below 2, that just really tells you that that second display is matching really closely with the first display you're cloning. And that's a subtlety that I miss entirely in my video, so I didn't even mention that until we have this discussion.
Well, that's all right. Now we can have this conversation right now, so that's I think it's a plus.
Yeah, exactly. Now, this leads us into another concept too about, and I've been having a conversation with Chris about this because he's the expert that I'm going to talk to about these things. For instance, this is an SW. This is SW272Q. This is their 2K model. It looks really great. It has a matte panel. Really awesome. Now, there's advantages of having, for example, a hardware calibrated display. And again, this is something that comes up in our discussion about this. It's something that I never thought about before. But one of the things about software calibrated display in general, for instance, if you use Calibrate software, and not that Calibrate software is not doing a good job or anything, but it requires some figuring out. Right?
Yes.
So we have to figure out the backlight. We have to figure out if it WLED, is it PFS phosphor, is it
RGB LED?
Yeah, yes. RGB, OLED, mini LED, all those things. These are, in super geeky color management terms, abbreviated EDR, and it stands for
emissive data reference.
Yes. So these are pretty much the color output from the display. Then they're mathematical models for how the colors are coming out, right?
Right.
And essentially, you got to choose those. So when you have, for instance, BenQ PD and you're using Calibrate software, you're really trying to figure out what is the backlight that you want to use. And a lot of times, you can try to make your best guesstimate, but one of the things that we have a discussion about too is that a lot of display manufacturers, and I say this to many of you guys in my videos, that contact the display manufacturer, ask them what backlight technology they're using. Chris just told me one good bit of information. I was totally wrong on that because the display manufacturer will not tell you that technology, or not so willingly, right?
Right.
And part of the reason why what Chris told me was that there's just too many of them.
Yeah, currently, as right now, there are probably like more than 4 or 5 different backlight technology. They are all categorized as LED backlight. But in this case, all of the backlights, they have different signatures. As signatures, that means in spectral data, they look very differently. So you have to choose a different EDR to compensate for those differences.
Yeah, so you have to choose those wisely, which can be somewhat of a difficult task. And usually in my calibration videos, I'll give you some rough guide, but without knowing exactly what the display manufacturer is using, we can't really do a good job figuring it out. And this is something that came up organically in our conversation. This is where a hardware calibrated display comes in handy, because what Chris is telling me, and I'll have Chris tells you this, is that with Palette Master Ultimate, or even Palette Master Element before it, BenQ automatically selects the EDR for that particular display backlight
to
output.
match that backlight.
Yeah.
We did a lot of testing, and we actually matched the backlight to actual spectral photometer to get the best reading out from a colorimeter. So they match, I won't say perfectly, but better with that EDR, particular EDR. So we select the panel backlight with the corresponding EDR together and match that in our software. So when you actually select the right model for that your display, and in our software, it just select the EDR. So there's no selection for you. You don't need to select EDR in our software, right? That's automatic carry out.
Yeah, and that's another big inherent advantage of having a hardware calibrated display. One that, again, unless you have like put 2 color geeks into your room, you're never going to really think about those little things, but those are really crucial and important things. That's also part of the reason why sometimes like you have a software calibrated display that has a fairly decent delta E, but for example, the RGB tracking is starting to deviate out from each other a little bit. And that's because as much as you try, a lot of these general software profiling, you know, not the hardware calibrated display one, are really using a few generic EDRs that are out there and are not specific to that display. Even though you may get one that comes close, it's not going to be exact, not the way how hardware calibrated display is.
And especially the white could be very profound. You could find out it could be a little bit reddish or maybe greenish in some cases. So it could be found visually.
Anything else you'd like to add about these two concepts, Delta E and hardware calibrated display and EDR?
I think these are just tied together because unless you have the correct EDR, you won't have a really good Delta E performance out here. So basically, that's why we always recommend a hardware calibration display to go with these colorimeter.
Gotcha. So yeah, that's the primary thing that I want to get out of it here, because I know many of you are probably, like I said, wondering, as I mentioned in the beginning, 2 displays, low delta E, color doesn't match. That's part of the reason is the EDR thing. The other thing too that I'm just going to bring it into this discussion anyway is every single panel uses a different LCD panel, right? The liquid crystal itself is different, and then the backlight's also different. So you add those 2 combination together, unless you get the exact same model and almost the exact same time that you purchase 2 together in the same batch, chances of those matching are gonna, like, you know, they diminish. Like the moment you start to buy, like you buy one now, you maybe buy one in another year. They're different panel at that point, right? Like different LCD from a different batch, those kind of things. And if you go with another model, that also makes it more difficult to like match them together.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this kind of leads us into another concept. We're going to just talk about this just briefly. We're not going to go into like too much geeky detail, and that is Metamerism.
Right.
So Metamerism is one of those things where, for instance, it's a term used a lot in printing, and it's used a lot before because the ink technology, like especially with inkjet and pigment inks, are not really good before. So you see a lot of times like the bronzing, where it's like it looks like bronze in the light, but it also depends too on the light source you use, because the color perception are totally different.
Yes.
And as I'm talking with Chris, I'm learning more about Metamerism. It doesn't really apply to just only print. It applies to pretty much almost color perception in general, right?
There are actually a lot of different kinds of Metamerism. So there are like illumination of Metamerism, which is more happen in printing, because same color patches under different lighting, you'll see different. It doesn't match in different lighting. That's very easy found in printing industry. But in display, actually observer metamerism, which is very profound. Okay, especially in this case, in right now, because all the displays right now are having very narrow bandwidth. Okay, so why is this happening? Because everybody sees color differently. We all have different sensitivities. For example, like me and you, like, we're different people. We have different sensitivities. Everybody does. Even though like twins, they have very different sensitivities. Okay, so in this case, that means because when we actually see the color, we actually see the color from the spectral point, and then it how it excites the our like sensitivity
Or receptors.
And then that goes into our brain, okay, and they interprets that excitement. Okay, so this sensitivity really plays a big role in our like color perception. Okay, so this case, since we're emitting the same spectral, okay, and a little bit difference in the sensitivity, especially in the narrow bandwidth, that contains a lot of energy. So that if you multiply by a different sensitivity, it gives you like huge difference in the numbers, especially in the XYZ numbers. So that gives you like total different colors out there. So that's why we see a lot more this we call like metamerism effect nowadays rather than before. Like before, like in CCFL or in CRT, the spectral we're looking at was almost flat. There's not there the energy across is more even than right now. So that's why we don't see a lot of like a metamerism causing it right now.
So it has something to do with like display technology, and that's also the reason why, like, for instance, like, even though there is a defined, I will use this as a good example, defined purple, defined red, we could be seeing it slightly different.
Yes.
We understand it as purple and red in general terms, right?
Yeah.
And that's also part of the reason why Pantone exists, to define a color as a standard, that there is a Pantone standard and there is a way how to mix CMYK together to reproduce that color
the
faithfully.
spot color.
The spot color, exactly. And that's also the reason why displays are Pantone validated to get the good colors, to know that you're going to see exactly that Pantone color.
Yeah.
And that's also one big reason too why, as a professional, calibration is crucial. Even if you don't have a hardware calibrated display, you should calibrate. But this is also one of the reasons why.
That's tied back to the previous discussion about EDR, because EDR is actually, it's a, like we say, it's a compensation for the calorimeter to reproduce what the spectral photometer can read for that particular backlight. So it's actually doing the right measurement for that particular backlight to have a corresponding color output for that for the color. Okay, so that's why we need the correct EDR for this particular backlight in order to us to have the right reading from the color that we are calibrating to. So this is why that is very crucial to have the right EDR.
And that's why hardware calibrated display still reigns supreme. So in the world, and I think this discussion is important too, not so much that I'm here as BenQ ambassador with Chris to talk about display and like you should get hardware calibrated display or get BenQ. That's not the whole discussion. The whole discussion here is, this is the reason why hardware calibrated display in the world that we're living in it, and we may not think is as important anymore, because like, why would we get a hardware calibrated display when, for example, there are displays that can show similar color gamuts now, right? That are just software calibrated. Like, we don't need that. But this is one of those crucial, important factors in the decision making why, as a creative pro, especially one who prints, not only to get a hardware calibrated display, but to run a hardware calibration on it properly. So again, one of those things we don't really think about as much, and in the world that we live in right now, because all of our displays surrounds us every day, our phone, for instance, we don't think about these things. But these are just some important discussions for us to really keep in the back of our mind, especially for pro, especially if we want to get super good color consistency and accuracy. This is the way how we're going to achieve that.
Yeah. So another thing about the Metamerism I want to bring up is, since the backlight are different right now, they also cause, different backlights also cause the Metamerism, because the spectral power distribution is so different. So that's causing calculation and XYZ values are very different. So that's causing a pain for us right now. So one experiment you can do is line up your phones. Okay, different generations of iPhones, take a picture of it, you'll see totally different whites. Okay.
Yeah.
They all calibrate to the same color temperature, but you'll just see very different responses from the camera. That is, we have a fixed observer, but you will see very different outputs from that. That is evidence of having different backlight responses to the incorrect observer.
Yeah, and that happens all the time with iPhones. I mean, like from one generation to the next, there are slight changes in color. I mean, even if you have two iPhones next together, sometimes they're just slightly off. They're not bad. I mean, Apple done a really good job with calibration. And this is not to say that Apple does not do a good job. They've done a fantastic job calibrating it from the factory. But nonetheless, these inherent differences are still there.
Yes.
And I think the more we are aware of these, the better we are going to become getting more color accuracy out of our devices and what we can really expect from our displays.
Yes.
Really cool. This is a really great, amazing, in-depth, short discussion. I think to many of you guys out there, hopefully this is something that's not too geeky and is something that is enlightening to you guys. Anything else you'd like to add, Chris? Or you think
I think at this point we talked enough already. Yeah. The more we talk about this, won't stop.
Oh, we go for hours with this, like when we have a conversation. But we're gonna just save those until we can gather good summary topics or executive summary and share them with you in a video like this. Hopefully next time when you come and visit again.
Yeah, of course.
So, all right. So thank you so much, Chris, for visiting the studio. And, one of the privileges I have is to just spend time with Chris. Oh, and by the way, we were just really at literally just about a week or two ago at Adobe Max. What do you think about the conference? This is your first time there.
This is my first time physically being in a conference. I think it's good. We have lots of discussion with the creatives, and I think it's a good mix over there. Yeah.
Yeah. The one nice thing about Max, I'll plug Max a little bit too, is that you're not only having a conference for just one type of creative. So it's not just photo, it's not just video, but it's photo, video, graphic design. It's pretty much all the Adobe Creative Suite coming together, and you have these kind of mixture of synergy, which is really awesome. But I'll have another video talking about Max later on. Anyway, if you have any questions about this discussion we're having, leave them in the comment section below. Either myself or Chris will jump in, or I'll share the question with Chris and he'll answer that for us. Give it a like, subscribe, and hit on the bell of renew, and in art we trust. That's the clap. Cool. All right, let's see. Oh, now I just gotta start the video. I forgot what I'm gonna say. Man, I have the whole thing planned out and I totally blank. Don't worry, we can cut these.
Yeah.
What if there was one more thing I told you I wanted to talk about?
Yeah, it's related to delta E.